Well, let's unpick some more of this now with my panel this evening. Representative Mike Levin, he's a Democratic congressman representing California's 49th district, and Rodney Davis, former Republican congressman from Illinois. Welcome to you both. Very good to have you with us this evening. Congressman Rodney, I mean, just looking at this from the outside, but of course you are still speaking to Republican contacts there on the Hill. Yesterday, the passage of this already seemed quite uncertain. We're hearing reports we could see a vote tonight. How much of an uphill struggle do you think this could be still?
Well, it's always an uphill struggle, especially with the small majority that Speaker Johnson has in the House of Representatives. But the Rules Committee, so the process is going to be, it has to go through rules. The Rules Committee will have to report this bill out. And then Congressman Levin and my former colleagues will vote on the rule tonight. Maybe that gets done by midnight. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know what the Speaker would have planned on when that vote on the final bill would be. So there's got to be at least a couple of votes before this thing passes as one big, beautiful bill.
I mean, there's sticking points among the Republicans. Coming to you, Congressman Levin, of course, surely there are multiple sticking points when it comes to the Democrats. Just talk us through some of the issues there from the Democratic perspective.
Well, the bill is definitely big. I don't think it's beautiful. I have a lot of problems with this bill, and you actually laid several of them out in your introduction. What it'll add to the debt, roughly $3.8 trillion over a decade, even with dynamic scoring, $3.3 trillion over a decade. If that weren't bad enough, it's to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans. And it really does a disservice to the most vulnerable in our country, whether it's the senior who needs Medicare or the veteran who relies on food assistance or children. It really does go after the most vulnerable. Roughly 14 million Americans will lose their health insurance, including 2 million just in my state of California. And about 10 million Americans will be at risk of not having enough to eat. It also really does a number on all of the clean energy provisions that reduce energy costs that I worked very hard on in the last Congress. And, Rodney's exactly right. I was in the Rules Committee a little while ago offering an amendment, and there are still tons of amendments to be offered. And I'll be impressed if we get through just the rule even tonight. But, we miss common sense, good people like Rodney over here who can help offer some good amendments and improve this bill.
Well, still clearly an awful lot to wade through this evening. But Congressman Davis, when you look at this and the point being made there from Congressman Levin when it comes to the most vulnerable Americans, and I just wonder, taking the perhaps slightly longer view, looking, for example, at the midterms, some of those lower income Americans who voted for Donald Trump but could be left worse off, according to Congressman Levin, through cuts to things like health insurance. Are you concerned about that?
Okay, I dealt with these same arguments and debate points when I voted to fix a broken healthcare system in 2017, because the healthcare system that we currently have still leaves about 30 million Americans behind who don't have health insurance or can't afford health insurance. And I heard the doomsday statistics when we tried to reform the SNAP program. And when you look into the details of what the Republicans are trying to do right now, a good chunk of what is being discussed as Medicaid cuts is to simply allow for able-bodied adults who can work, who can be in our job sector right now, to be trained and paired with jobs that they can go into and thus not need Medicaid or government benefits. That, to me, is a good step forward. And frankly, when you look at most Americans, if you pull this issue, it's about an 80-20 issue when you explain it that way.
Well, these are the very details that will be hashed out this evening on the Hill. Another big story, of course, that we have all been watching here in Washington and indeed around the world, of course, is that meeting between the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump. Congressman Levin, what did you make of the optics of that meeting in the Oval Office today?
Well, look, I go back to the first day of the Trump administration when President Trump issued an executive order to do away with the refugee program. Had we had a refugee program in place, we could have had a honest assessment of what's going on the ground in South Africa, free of political bias. And that was, what the refugee program is designed to do. But instead, we're left with what certainly seems to be a very politicized decision. And again, that shouldn't be the nature of how we treat our friends and allies around the world.
And taking that to you, Congressman, your thoughts of what we saw unfolding in the Oval Office, and also some of the claims that President Trump made when it comes to white genocide, for example, largely been discredited. Is that a concern at all for you to see him using those kind of claims?
Well, the president clearly feels that it's a major issue, enough to bring it up with the media in the Oval Office and the South African president. So we'll find out very quickly if what President Trump presented to the South African president is actually true or not. Mm-hmm. That will be proven true and accurate, or it won't be. And then I think we can make an assessment after that. But however, if the president felt strong enough to bring it up, let's wait for the fact checkers to decide if the information was accurate.
Many of them have pronounced that these claims are largely discredited. But I also do want to talk about briefly the deportations that we've seen that were reportedly to South Sudan of migrants. We don't know exactly where these men are at the moment. Are you concerned, Rodney, about reports that these men didn't have due process in talking about their case before they were then put on this flight to Africa?
Well, these are questions that the courts and courts at many levels are actually answering right now. And the administration is going to have to take into consideration those court decisions. But this is the end result of what the American people wanted the Biden administration to do, which was to address the border surge that the whole world witnessed during the last administration. The president has done that. We're at record low entries, illegal entries into the United States of America. And now these individual cases and issues are going to be adjudicated by the courts, and we'll see what happens with the Department of Homeland Security.
And Congressman Levin, taking that to you, I mean, the argument from the Trump administration is that because of the Biden era policy, they have had to act quickly. We have seen courts rule against that. Just your response to what we're seeing with regards to the reports of these 8 men being flown somewhere in Africa.
Well, look, the first thing I would say is I think Rodney and I would agree that we have to get criminals who are here illegally, we have to deport them. The problem with these individuals is that they're being deported to a third country, and due process is necessary in that instance, and really in every instance. And to have Kristi Noem just yesterday not even understand the basics of habeas corpus, it's deeply concerning. We can't have this administration violating court orders. What I would argue is that the last administration, I felt that the pendulum swung too far one way on things like the broken asylum system and the situation at the border. I called it out at the time, but now the pendulum has swung way too far the other way. And what we're seeing now is just wholesale, mass deportation and in some cases cruelty and a violation of people's due process rights. And I don't think that specifically is what the American people signed up for.
Representative Mike Levin, a Democrat representing California's 49th district, and Rodney Davis, a regular with the BBC, former Republican congressman from Illinois. Really good to have this conversation this evening. Thank you, Jen.